Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Chess Diagnostic. Today I'm going to go over a question that was posed on my YouTube channel by David Wu, and he says, can you go over the thought process and time management for Blitz? And then he clarified, he said, I've been struggling with this for a while, trying to map out a table with recommended time per move and Botvinnik's rule for 20% of the time in the opening 15 moves. Now, this is a very interesting topic. And of course, I just want to clarify before I get into it with some of my own game examples that the best way to actually improve at Blitz and Bullet is to play more slow chess. It's a bit ironic to say that, but it's very logical because in order to do something fast, you have to do it slow. I would just use an example of the harmonica, and I'm a musician, so that's also kind of a similar brain pathway. And I'll just use a quick example. When you learn a lick, if some of you aren't musicians, a lick is basically like a riff that you play, and you can just use it in a lot of different contexts. So on the harmonica, you would play something like... Now, of course, in order for me to learn a riff like that on the harmonica, I had to do it very slow for 1 or 2 years. I could not play it that fast. So... especially that kind of tongue switching part. Now I can do it very fast. So that's just an example from music that I want to make as an analogy. So of course, just with that out of the way, I will give some practical tips. Okay, so let me get into some examples from here. All right, so the first practical tip I would give when you're playing Bullet and Blitz is that you really want to focus on activity over material. And in the opening, you should not think long at all because, of course, a lot of times you're going to lose Blitz games because you blunder in the middle game or in the end game when you're in time trouble. And so you want to avoid time trouble as much as you can, and hopefully your opponent gets into time trouble. But you just have to accept the fact that you're going to make a lot of tactical mistakes because you really can't follow the comprehensive thought process, the 4-step thought process I talk about in my strategy course. So basically the thought process is basically following your intuition of attacking moves and what to play, maybe openings that you know. And then what you want to do, you always want to do a blunder check. And I think your blunder check should be simplified to understanding what the opponent is threatening from their last move. So let's see what happens here. So this was a game I played yesterday against a quite high-rated opponent in a tournament. I think it was the Hourly Bullet. And for me, I focus in the opening of getting as many pieces out and as active as possible. I know it sounds so simple, but when you're playing, you'd be surprised how even very strong opponents don't do this. Now, my opponent does follow these ideas. I play somewhat unorthodox by fianchettoing my bishop in kind of a dragon. Now notice that, of course, after he castles, he's protecting the g7 bishop. So basically, you want to just prevent any kind of tactical complications. That's just my own personal thing. If you try to make things really complicated, and it can go in your opponent's favor very quickly. So my strategy is to just play very simple, solid moves, and I wait for my opponent to blunder, essentially. Because obviously you're only going to win if your opponent makes a mistake. Just sidestepping any discovery. And now, both of us are completely developed, and it would be otherwise completely equal. Yeah, okay, so with black, he has a slight advantage because he can take the c-file. And you can learn a lot from Blitz games, I would say. But what you have to do is you have to go through them after the fact and understand not necessarily where you went wrong in your thought process, but how, if you had this position, you could approach it so that you made the correct move. That's really the process of improvement. Okay, so h6, chasing the bishop back, keep it in the center, limiting the bishop's activity. I probably should have just played f4. Let's see what... Okay, so suggesting knight to d5. I probably would have just played f4. And, you know, the computer is going to have different suggestions, but you should always use your own mind first before relying on the computer, because the computer might not suggest something, but if it seems logical to you, you should always check it with the computer, especially for the tactics. But for me, f4 seems very logical, threatening here, threatening f5 and an attack, and it's a very simple move. Okay, so he attacked, and then, of course, I blundered here. I should have went queen here, and then he would have got c4, but I could have went back, and I would have been okay. Although he's getting more activity, as you can see, the evaluation goes in his favor. But you can't rely on hard evaluations. You have to think about how complicated the position is as well. So he gets in this after I go queen to e2. And then he missed that I was going to take with the bishop. And then he blunders right back. So you're going to see moves like this a lot, especially in bullet. So now I have a huge advantage. So in order to win these kind of positions in bullet, you really want to trade off as many pieces as possible. So I move the king up. I'm just going for safety and trying to attack on the king side. Centralize my pieces, preventing him from attacking my bishop. All right, now my main goal, that's another mistake, is to just trade pieces. So he attacks me, but I have that check, take, and now he makes further tactical mistakes. Okay, so you can see even a player like this will make a ton of tactical mistakes, and that's another thing I want to say, is that when you make one tactical mistake, try not to get tilted, because that's going to happen a lot. You make one mistake, and then you just stop checking any moves. You just start making random moves, random threats. You really need to focus on what your opponent's last move was. So if we go back to that position, so if my opponent did a simple check of he moved the bishop, and I know it's hard to do, but I've been doing it more and more and playing a little more stably than I normally do, just because I've been trying to speed up that process, and I have lost a lot of blitz and bullet games on time because I'm focusing on that. And now, of course, he could have checked here, so that was actually a big blunder. Now I'm just seeing that. So a lot of tactics missed in this game. He probably didn't expect that, but he still played c4, and he just fell apart because he made that mistake. And you can still win a lot of games even if you're down material and you make a mistake. So let me just go through, finish this game out. So more mistakes, basically lost everything, and then I ended up just getting a queen and checkmating him like that. Okay, so I'm just showing these kind of games because this is a realistic blitz scenario, and even super GMs have these kind of problems where they can get tilted if they make a mistake. All right, let's move on to the next position here. Okay, this is probably my favorite example actually. This was played 4 days ago in the hourly bullet arena. And the opponent's quite high rated, almost 2,500 in bullet, which those are very tough opponents. And let's just go through the game. So I played e4, knight to f3, and he's going for the Caro-Kann anyway. And again, just take, and then develop and throw pieces up. Now, in this specific variation, he wants to play bishop to g4, and so he waited a little bit, and I play h3, so he can't. And now he has to play bishop to f5. And now I can't necessarily develop my knight to d2. Again, that would be a blunder, because if I play knight to d2, knight from b to d2, then he would just take. So blunder check there. And I'm just trying to solidify that e5 square. I take the light square bishop. And now I have a tiny advantage, but that's not so important. What's important is that I'm developing all my pieces very quickly. Takes, and now I have the bishop pair, and these bishops to me are looking great for this kingside attack, which is my plan. His plan is to try to open the c file. So he brings the knight back. I just ignore that. I play g4, preparing f4 and f5, which actually isn't the best plan. but we'll see what happens here. So he takes. I take with the pawn just to kind of reduce his bishop's activity, although he could have played here. And again, that's more psychological than it is positional. All right, so he brings the queen out, which actually pins the ability to play f4, so I have to move the king. And you can see we are all moving very quickly. I mean, this is 20 seconds, a second a move, basically. He plays d4, and now your immediate reaction to this move, you should think about that if you don't get it right, but it really should be c4, which is what I play right away. You do not want to take this, and the reason for that is, I know I said take, but the reason for that is you have to look at what the opponent's trying to do. He's trying to open up this position, ruin all your pawns, and start a queenside attack, which just distracts you from your own plans. So obviously c4, protected by the bishop, closes off the c-file to the rook. It kind of blockades this pawn, and it also keeps the queen from going, into these squares. And now he moves back, and I just resume with f4. Now after c4, he could have played g5, preventing f4, which actually is the best move, but it's kind of hard to find because it looks like he kind of opens. But with g6, for example, if I play queen here, g6. But again, in bullet, you have no time to analyze. You're just kind of playing on instinct and blunder checks. All right, so of course, the general strategic ideas come into play quite heavily because that's how you're playing on intuition. All right, so I play f4, and actually after this rook move, I missed the idea of g5. The computer immediately finds g5. Now g5 is a great idea because, I mean, look at this. It completely closes off all counterplay. The bishop really has nowhere to go. The rooks and the queen, I just love this position. Obviously the computer agrees. It's just, you just have complete leeway to play h4, h5, undermine the g6 pawn. With the light square bishop and the queen, you can immediately bring the rook over because the king's out of the way, and it's quite slow and hard and doesn't really even matter, but for him to play a6 and b5 to open up the queen side, not totally effective. Okay, so I missed that idea, and I played f5, which actually is not the best, of course, but this is why you can still look through blitz games and learn quite a bit. So he takes, and now again, you're seeing almost a 2500 bullet player. He's making a simple error. He had bishop to f6, which immediately I saw, and I was kind of like, oh crap, that's not the best. I could still take g6 and then get check, but it basically opens up the position and the center, and is exactly what I didn't want to happen. So he misses that and goes back, and then I just start taking. And now, again, I could just take, but then he wins the center pawn and he gets activity. So when you are playing a bullet game, you want to look for the piece that's the least active, and then you want to just activate everything if you're not fully developed. And that's what I do here. And bring the queen in. Now I can win the pawn. And actually my next threat is queen to h5. So he has to give away his rook. And he makes another blunder. Again, blunders beget more blunders. And so after this, he could have tried queen to g3, but eventually I'd be able to trade with more checks, starting with like queen to f5. All right, so I'm a rook up, and we'll just go through these quickly. Basically just, I was half the time, but that's enough to do a simple ladder mate. You really should know, this is why you really need to know these basic endgames, not necessarily all the theoretical endgames, but these kind of quick mating positions are very important to know for bullet. All right, so let's go on to a blitz game that I played that's a little more high quality and contains some deeper ideas. All right, so this was a game against a FIDE master that I played 3 months ago, and it's quite interesting because, of course, it's topsy-turvy, but it actually ended within 25 moves. So let's see what happens here. All right, so I play e4. He plays the French defense, basically advanced variation, takes. All right, he plays h6 because he doesn't want to allow me to take on h7, castles. And now you can see basically both of us have developed, but he does make a move back, which obviously he wants to bring the knight in. And actually for black, it's okay to kind of take his time because castling kind of lets me get a kingside attack somewhat, although in this position it's a little harder. But it's not so clear. Bishop back. All right, now he's attacking this bishop. I just developed the rook, preventing b4. All right, so this is a perfect example of when you play a higher level player, they're definitely going to kind of make you be more accurate and make you wait a little more to actually kind of free your position, which actually here he's kind of created a good example. And now he could have played b4 and just started with his queenside attack. And since the center is pretty closed off, not much going on, and he's not castled yet, that would actually been a good play to make. All right, so not the best move. It says queen d3 and just try to play in the center. So obviously I'm not playing the most accurately, but I just went for an attack. Again, in Blitz, you're not going to have always the best calculation and the best, most accurate moves. All right, and then I just pushed. He wasn't castled, so I was trying to take advantage of that. Rook takes, and then he castles. But now, of course, with these moves, h6 and f6, he has this really weak light squares. I can take, and objectively, I would say I'm close to lost if he plays accurately, but this is actually a perfect example of how it's very hard when you might be up material and he's up a piece for some pawns, but it's actually hard to defend. All right, so I secure that rook, and I'm planning to play something like, I don't know, maybe even bishop back and the knight in, or if I can get the knight here to f5. So he actually opens up the d4 square, and that's exactly what I occupy. Threatens the rook, and he wants to trade, but actually you can see that the evaluation has suddenly went in my favor with knight to f5. And now I'm threatening a 2-move mate where there's nothing he can do about it. And now it's a 4-move mate. So it's quite surprising. But again, he went after the material and he kind of got greedy. And my activity on the king side, basically this rook is not doing anything, and this bishop's not doing anything. And pretty soon, once my queen comes over, it'll be 2 minor pieces and a queen versus a king and a rook. This is how you can learn from these kind of positions. So he plays there, and then I just occupy these weak light squares. A perfect example, and he resigned because there's no way to stop, check. If he brings a king in, then I just check here and checkmate. All right, so you can see even titled players, FIDE masters, kind of make these kind of basic errors. And, you know, for me, I was never trying to play perfect chess. I was always trying to, you know, have an understanding that I could apply in the game and try to play as good as I could. And that's, for me, the fun of chess, especially when you get to checkmate or at least make FIDE masters resign within 20 moves. So, you know, this is powerful stuff here that I talk about. I'm not just speaking out of my ass. So hopefully you learned something. And if you have any more questions, I'll probably make more videos in the future about the Blitz thought process now that I'm actually thinking deeper about it. All right, this is kind of a long video. Hopefully you watched it and learned something from it, and leave a comment below, and I'll see you in the future.